Today I'm going to talk about starting a torsion bookmark pattern which has torsion ground to start it, and then starting and using Roseground within a pattern. This pattern's from one of the Lace Guild books on bookmarks, but you find this Roseground pattern in many designs and they're all worked in a similar way. Now there are many versions of doing Roseground, and I'm just going to show you the basic one that I always start beginners with. So first of all I'm going to hang 2 pairs of bobbins on 2 temporary support pins above the pattern, and we're going to work the torsion ground, which is half stitch, pin, half stitch. So we work a half stitch, put the first pin in the top pinhole, and because it's half stitch you can then drop the temporary pins down and work a second half stitch to cover the pin. Now I'm going to work down the right hand side first, each time adding 1 more pair on the temporary support pin, to the right this time, and again work a half stitch, put a pin in and work a second half stitch, and each time drop in the loop off that temporary support pin. This puts the pairs in place ready to work the Roseground stitch, and I need to do it for 3 or 4 pinholes down each side to be able to work the first torsion ground. Each time putting it on a temporary pin and working the stitch. Try not to pick 2 pins up at once, which happens often when you're trying to film a video like this, but it doesn't make the lace any quicker. So I'm going to put enough in to be able to do 2 Rosegrounds for you on the video. If I was actually starting this bookmark and doing the full bookmark, I would continue down this line as far as the point here, putting pairs in, and then the same on the other side. So I'm just going to do it for the first 2 Rosegrounds and then go to the other side and do exactly the same there. So again, hanging one on a temporary support pin, working half stitch, pin, half stitch, and working down this diagonal line. So those 2 there will form the first torsion, the first Roseground stitch, and I'll do a couple more so I can get 2 Rosegrounds in on each side. Again, I would continue as far as the diagonal line on this side if I was going to do the full bookmark. Now Rosegrounds, as I say, there are many variations of this. There are 16 published ones in the Book of Stitches, but I'm going to show you the basic one which covers the techniques, and it's just a variation of stitches you do for it. Now Roseground, instead of working the full diagonal line, we're going to work these 4 pins around this little square. Sometimes it's drawn as a circle, sometimes a little square, but you start off with the 4 pins around that, and we work the whole of the 4 pins before moving on. Now to do the stitch we need the 4 pairs of bobbins, 2 from the left and 2 from the right. Just move it out a little so you can see what's happening. 2 from the left are joined together before we do any of the pins. It's a preparation stitch, a joining stitch, whatever you like to call it. Now generally I do it as a cloth stitch and twist for the basic one, and the same on the right, a cloth stitch and twist, and this forms a little kiss shaped stitch. Now there are no pins put in when you've done that stitch. You can now work the 4 pins around this Roseground block. We start in the middle with the middle 2 pairs, and this will form the stitch for the pinhole at the top. And we're going to do it half stitch, pin, half stitch, as in Torchon ground, but the preparation stitch you do first means it becomes Roseground. Then if you do the 2 on the right hand pin, half stitch, pin, half stitch, and then the 2 on the left for the pin on the left, and then the 2 in the middle for the pinhole in the middle at the bottom. And then after you finish the 4 pins, you again need to do this joining stitch. So it's cloth stitch and twist, and cloth stitch and twist. And those 2 pairs on each side are now ready to do the stitch, the Roseground on the left and the Roseground on the right. So we get the next 2 pairs on the right. We'll do the right hand one first, diagonally downhill, and we'll look at this. Now before you do any Roseground, as I say, you need the joining stitch. You've already got it from doing the previous Roseground on the left, but the 2 joining from the right need this cloth stitch and twist before you start. You've always got to have that between whatever the pair's coming from on each side. And again, then you can go and do your half stitch, pin, half stitch around that pin, around the circle or the square that marks the Roseground. And always when you finish the 4 pins, do the cloth stitch and twist. Even if you go in then into a cloth stitch trail or a block of some description, they need that joining stitch to finish it. And there you can see you have a nice round shape that is the Roseground. Now if I was doing it again as a bookmark, I would then continue down here. Would have already set in the pairs for the trail, for the edge, and I would continue to do the 3rd Roseground. But as I'm just doing it as a sample, I would then come up over to the left hand side, get it back in the picture, and I would start on the left hand side, and again cloth stitch and twist to prepare to join. The one from the right has already got it in, and so it's ready to do the 4 pinholes around that circle. And that is all there is to Roseground. However, as I say, there are a lot of variations. Sometimes you might do a half stitch joining stitch and a cloth stitch and twist for the pinholes, and all sorts of variations. It's worth trying the different combinations because they do give you a very different look. This is a nice basic one, and it gets you into the swing of working the 4 pins around the circle rather than a straight diagonal line. I hope you've enjoyed that video and find it useful. Give me a like, leave me a comment, and let me know what you want to see next. Thanks for watching.